A pitch-black screen. The piercing, high-pitched whine of a medical bone drill shatters the silence. Beneath the mechanical roar, a desperate, frantic screech of a primate echoes through the darkness. The harsh fluorescent lights violently flicker on. A terrified macaque monkey is bolted into a cold, heavy metal restraint chair. Thick electrical wires are driven directly into its exposed cerebral cortex. Science enthusiastically called this groundbreaking medical progress, but the trapped monkeys knew this room only as absolute, inescapable hell. Welcome to the dark, heavily guarded corridors of the Institute for Behavioral Research. In the summer of 1981, a chilling experiment was taking place in Silver Spring, Maryland. 17 intelligent, deeply social macaque monkeys were locked inside a secret laboratory. They were the unwilling test subjects for a controversial neurological study. The researchers wanted to understand the concept of neuroplasticity and nerve regeneration. To achieve this, they performed a horrific surgical procedure known as de-efferentation. They intentionally sliced through the spinal sensory ganglia of the monkeys. This completely severed the sensory nerves connected to their arms and hands. The monkeys woke up from the crude surgeries utterly terrified. They could still move their arms, but they could no longer feel them at all. Their limbs became dead, numb weights dragging on the filthy cage floors. But crippling the animals was only the first step of the nightmare. The true psychological and physical torture was about to begin. The lead scientist wanted to force the monkeys to use their deadened, numb limbs. He believed that extreme physical coercion could literally rewire their brains. To prove his theory, he stripped away every single ounce of their dignity. The animals were about to endure a curriculum of pain that defies belief. A pitch-black screen. The piercing, high-pitched whine of a medical bone drill shatters the silence. Beneath the mechanical roar, a desperate, frantic screech of a primate echoes through the darkness. The harsh fluorescent lights violently flicker on. A terrified macaque monkey is bolted into a cold, heavy metal restraint chair. Thick electrical wires are driven directly into its exposed cerebral cortex. Science enthusiastically called this groundbreaking medical progress, but the trapped monkeys knew this room only as absolute, inescapable hell. Welcome to the dark, heavily guarded corridors of the Institute for Behavioral Research. In the summer of 1981, a chilling experiment was taking place in Silver Spring, Maryland. 17 intelligent, deeply social macaque monkeys were locked inside a secret laboratory. They were the unwilling test subjects for a controversial neurological study. The researchers wanted to understand the concept of neuroplasticity and nerve regeneration. To achieve this, they performed a horrific surgical procedure known as de-efferentation. They intentionally sliced through the spinal sensory ganglia of the monkeys. This completely severed the sensory nerves connected to their arms and hands. The monkeys woke up from the crude surgeries utterly terrified. They could still move their arms, but they could no longer feel them at all. Their limbs became dead, numb weights dragging on the filthy cage floors. But crippling the animals was only the first step of the nightmare. The true psychological and physical torture was about to begin. The lead scientist wanted to force the monkeys to use their deadened, numb limbs. He believed that extreme physical coercion could literally rewire their brains. To prove his theory, he stripped away every single ounce of their dignity. The animals were about to endure a curriculum of pain that defies belief. Macaque monkeys possess an emotional intelligence that closely mirrors our own. They mourn their dead, they form deep friendships, and they crave physical affection. But in the Silver Spring laboratory, their complex minds were systematically dismantled. The constant, unpredictable electric shocks induced a state of profound learned helplessness. The monkeys eventually stopped trying to avoid the pain altogether. They simply collapsed onto the electrified grids, silently absorbing the agonizing voltage. The psychological trauma manifested in horrifying, self-destructive, neurotic behaviors. Denied any external stimulation, the monkeys turned their frustration inward. They began to violently bite and chew on their own deadened, senseless arms. Because the nerves were cut, they felt no pain as they mutilated their own flesh. They stripped the skin and muscle right down to the white bone. It was a desperate psychological cry for help that the researchers completely ignored. Some monkeys paced in endless, repetitive circles until their paws bled on the wire. Others simply stared blankly at the stained concrete walls, their minds completely shattered. The vibrant, curious spark in their deep brown eyes was entirely extinguished. They were replaced by the hollow, thousand-yard stare of a broken prisoner of war. The concept of sleep offered absolutely no sanctuary from the daily torment. They were constantly awakened by the screeching of other tortured monkeys in the dark. The laboratory was an echo chamber of relentless, unending primate agony. The scientists walked past the cages daily, taking clinical notes on clipboards. They detached themselves entirely from the horrific suffering unfolding right in front of them. They documented the self-mutilation as dry, scientific data points on a graph. The monkeys were not viewed as living, breathing beings capable of profound suffering. They were classified as expendable inventory, property to be used and discarded. The Silver Spring monkeys were completely abandoned by humanity in the name of neurological research. But the impenetrable walls of the Institute for Behavioral Research were hiding a fatal flaw. In the summer of 1981, a young college student applied for a job at the lab. His name was Alex Pacheco, and he was secretly an undercover animal rights investigator. Pacheco walked into the laboratory and was instantly overwhelmed by the nauseating smell of rot. What he witnessed in those dark, windowless rooms haunted him for the rest of his life. He saw the 17 monkeys living in absolute, unspeakable squalor. He saw the rusted restraints, the bloody wire floors, and the exposed bones. Knowing that nobody would believe his word against a respected scientist, he needed hard proof. For months, Pacheco worked tirelessly inside the lab, gaining the researchers' trust. When the scientist went home for the night, his real, dangerous mission began. He smuggled a camera into the facility and documented every single atrocity. He photographed the festering wounds, the inadequate cages, and the profound misery. He brought in independent veterinarians in the dead of night to secretly examine the dying animals. The medical professionals were completely horrified by the gross negligence and deliberate cruelty. Armed with undeniable photographic evidence, Pacheco went directly to the police. He filed official charges of horrific animal cruelty against the lead researcher. The resulting police raid on the laboratory was completely unprecedented in American history. Law enforcement officers stormed the facility, seizing the 17 traumatized monkeys as vital evidence. The shocking photographs of the mutilated macaques were quickly released to the global press. The public was absolutely outraged by the blood-stained reality of animal testing. The illusion of a clean, sterile, and humane scientific environment was permanently shattered. The Silver Spring monkeys suddenly became the terrified, broken faces of a massive global movement. Their suffering ignited the modern animal rights debate in the United States. But the legal battle for their actual freedom was just beginning. The scientists fiercely fought back, demanding their property be returned immediately. The monkeys were caught in a grueling tug-of-war between compassion and cold bureaucracy. The subsequent trial was a massive media circus that lasted for several agonizing years. The lead scientist was initially convicted of animal cruelty, a historic, landmark verdict. However, the scientific community rallied behind him with massive financial and political support. They feared that this conviction would threaten the future of all animal experimentation. On appeal, the cruelty convictions were ultimately and tragically overturned on a legal technicality. The court ruled that state animal cruelty laws simply did not apply to federally funded researchers. It was a devastating, crushing blow to the activists fighting for the monkeys. While the humans argued in expensive courtrooms, the monkeys remained locked in cages. They were transferred to a military research facility, still trapped as living evidence. Despite massive public outcry and appeals from Congress, their suffering did not end. The scientific establishment was fiercely determined not to let the animal rights movement win. They refused to release the surviving macaques to a peaceful sanctuary. As the years dragged on, the monkeys slowly began to deteriorate and die. Their bodies, already ravaged by the initial experiments, finally surrendered to the stress. The military researchers decided to perform one final, cruel experiment on the survivors. They heavily anesthetized the remaining monkeys and mapped their brain activity one last time. After extracting the final drops of data, they systematically euthanized the broken animals. The 17 Silver Spring monkeys were born in the wild but died in a sterile laboratory. They never felt the warmth of the sun or the soft grass beneath their feet again. Their entire existence was consumed, commodified, and ultimately destroyed by human curiosity. The scientific establishment claimed a hollow victory, retaining their absolute power over the animals. But the gruesome images of the mutilated macaques could never be erased from the public memory. The monkeys paid the ultimate, agonizing price, but they did not die entirely in vain. Their brutal deaths forced the government to rewrite the laws governing animal welfare in laboratories. The tragedy established strict new ethical guidelines that still exist today. The legacy of the Silver Spring monkeys is a deeply uncomfortable mirror held up to humanity. It forces us to ask a terrifying, fundamental question about scientific progress. At what exact point does our thirst for knowledge cross the line into absolute sadism? We justify the torture of highly intelligent creatures by claiming it benefits our own species. But true medical advancement should never require the complete destruction of empathy. The researchers in Maryland did not just cut sensory nerves, they cut their own moral ties. They looked into the eyes of suffering sentient beings and saw only disposable data. The rusted restraint chairs and the electric grids belong in the Dark Ages, not modern laboratories. Today, millions of animals are still locked behind the closed, secretive doors of research facilities. They endure horrific testing for cosmetics, household chemicals, and questionable medical theories. The system heavily relies on our collective ignorance and our willful blindness. The industry desperately wants us to believe that the suffering is minimal and necessary. But the screaming ghosts of the 17 macaques tell a vastly different story. They remind us that the animals in those cages feel terror, pain, and profound despair. We must demand transparency and push relentlessly for cruelty-free scientific alternatives. We possess the technology to map the human genome and build artificial intelligence. We certainly have the capability to stop torturing monkeys in metal boxes. The next time you see a medical breakthrough celebrated in the news, pause for a moment. Think about the silent, hidden victims who paid the price in the dark. Remember the monkeys who chewed off their own fingers trying to escape the pain. Remember the ones who were denied the simple mercy of a painless death. True progress is not measured by the data we extract from the vulnerable. True progress is measured by the compassion we extend to those at our absolute mercy. The Silver Spring monkeys cannot be brought back from the void, but their agonizing screams must echo in our scientific conscience forever.